everyone, today I'm here to talk about underrated books. So underrated books to me, and in this video in particular, are books that don't get enough love here on Booktube. Now I think with all of these books, honestly, that I'm mentioning today, you can go on Goodreads and find a plethora, like a ton of reviews. I don't think they're anywhere underrated on Goodreads or on the internet in general, but here on Booktube in particular, I don't see a lot of these books being talked about or being read. Some of these books I mentioned, I have seen a lot on other channels, but they haven't read them. So that is what I mean by underrated. These books I'm talking about today, I don't think get enough love here on Booktube. So I thought, hey, let's talk about them and hopefully more people will read them and fall in love with them as much as I did. So if you look up one of these books I mentioned on Goodreads, you're gonna be like, wow, this book has like 50,000 like ratings on it. Oh, that's why I'm saying it's underrated here on Booktube, because I feel like a lot of people, myself included, get a lot of recommendations here on Booktube. So I'm also talking about 10 of them. So 5 of them are going to be YA books and 5 of them are going to be adult books. Ooh, shaking it up a little bit. The first book I want to talk about I read last year and fell in love with, and that is Emmy and Oliver by Robin Benway. A lot of people, when they think of Robin Benway, they think of Far From the Tree, which came out last year and is gotten a lot of buzz with good reason. It's an amazing book. But she's written quite a few books, and one of them being Emmy and Oliver. I honestly picked up Emmy and Oliver on a whim from my library, wasn't expecting much from it, fell in love with the writing style, just the kind of quiet book that it is. And it's just a beautiful book that I don't think a lot of people have read. Sometimes with YA categories, there are a lot of hype books, and there's a lot of books that kind of fall through the cracks that not a lot of people talk about, and I'm just as much as guilty about that as anybody. But I'm so glad I found Emmy and Oliver. Emmy and Oliver is about, you guessed it, Emmy and Oliver. And they were best friends when they were growing up. They lived next door to each other, and then Oliver gets kidnapped by his dad when he was like 5 or 6, and he was gone for a long time, and then he comes home when he is 17 and things are different. So this book's all about Emmy and Oliver picking up the relationship, trying to be friends again, maybe more, and just kind of figuring out what to do when he's at home, because the only life he knew was with his dad on the road, and now he's kind of at a new place even though it is his home. So it's a very beautiful book. It's a very quiet book, like I keep saying, because there's not like a ton of plot progression in this book. Like, there's not a lot of action or things like that happen. It's just more about family and just the growth of a friendship and revisiting that friendship and things like that. I just wanted to be read more. I think it's just an adorable YA contemporary book, and I just love it. Another one I want to talk about is The Last Magician by Lisa Maxwell. Again, I read this last year. I got this in a box, and I had heard about it. A lot of people kept talking about it on Booktube, but I don't think a ton of people have read it. Could be 100% wrong. Just forgive me. But either way, this is a YA fantasy series. It's the first book in a series, and it's basically, this book is so tricky to explain. Magicians where magic's kind of outlawed, and we have a girl that can travel back in time, and so she goes back in time into like the 1902 in New York when, this magic was starting just to get outlawed and things were happening, and she has the job to steal like this book and artifact. Just know it's about like magicians and kind of being outlaw magicians and things like that. It is a lengthy novel, and it is kind of info dumpy, I will say that, but I really enjoyed the atmosphere this book had. 1902 in New York, it was kind of tough and brutal and very mysterious. I really enjoyed it for that. And I mean, I don't think a lot of people read this book. Like when I hear YA fantasy, you hear a lot of Throne of Glass or, Marissa Meyer books or Leigh Bardugo books, but I don't think a ton of people have read this one. And I think a lot of people would really enjoy it, especially for the time travel fact, as well as like the New York element. And it was just very, atmospheric to read, and again, really enjoyed it. Haven't heard a ton about it here on Booktube. Another one that I've read very recently that I fell in love with, that I have heard like nobody talk about here on Booktube, is You'll Miss Me When I'm Gone by Rachel Lynn Solomon. I picked this book up on a whim. The plot sounded very interesting, and I was surprised of how much I fell in love with this book. This is a very serious YA contemporary. It's not like happy-go-lucky. It's more of a sadder one, but I enjoy those as well sometimes. This is all about these twins named Adina and Tova, and they're not close as one thinks they would be because they're twins. They're very, very distant. Think something has happened in their past. They don't talk about it. And also their mother has Huntington's disease. They decide when they're 18 that they are going to take a blood test to see if one of them has the Huntington's genes, because you can test for that. And basically, without spoiling anything, one of them has it and one of them doesn't. So that the book kind of changes course because one of them has a very different future than the other one. The other one has a lot of, hurdles they're going to have to face and a different life than the other one. Also, their family is Jewish, which I also really enjoyed reading about because I don't read a lot about the Jewish culture in books, so I really enjoyed it for that matter. But I loved the writing of this book. I thought it was beautiful. I love the strained relationship of these sisters and how they kind of ebbed and flowed and they got closer, sometimes they not. I think the main point of this book is the bond of sisterhood and family. Family is a very big part, probably the biggest part of this whole book, and the fact it was just sad, but it was beautifully sad. So I highly recommend this one. Like I said, I've heard like nobody talk about it here on Booktube. Speaking of books that I read on a whim, I want to talk about The Wicked Deep by Shea Ernshaw. Again, I read this book quite randomly because I thought the plot sounded interesting. I was very surprised of how much I loved it. Now I will say I've seen a lot on Booktube as people haul it and things like that, but I haven't seen a ton of people read it, honestly. I could be wrong, like I keep saying, but this should be read because it's so amazing, honestly. I was surprised by how much I liked it. This book, I'd say, is the perfect mixture of practical magic and hocus pocus. If you love those two things, you must read this book. And bonus, if you want to read in October, totally atmospheric. This book follows this town of Sparrow, and it's this cursed town because centuries ago these three sisters that were dubbed as witches were drowned in the river of the town. Like, they got stones tied to their ankles and they were thrown into the river. And ever since then, these three sisters come back every summer for 3 weeks. They pick these three teenage girls and they inhabit their bodies and they lure teenage boys into the river to their death. Just a beautifully atmospheric book. I can't get over how atmospheric this was. Sometimes atmospheric books are kind of hit or miss for me, and this one I found was a big hit. I thought it was amazing. I think the perfect time to read this is in October. I might reread it then because I loved it that much, but it was just, again, so mysterious and alluring, this town of Sparrow and this curse and these three sisters, and I really enjoyed it. Like, hocus pocus, practical magic, this is the book for you. Like I said, I don't think a ton of people have read it, and it should be read. Last YA book that I want to talk about is Shuffle Repeat, another YA contemporary book that I read last year, fell in love with. I think I heard about this one on Kristen's channel, so it has been on Booktube a little bit, but I feel like not a ton of people have read this one. This is about these two friends that, have the carpool together every day to school, and it becomes something more. That's pretty much the gist of it. It's another kind of quiet YA contemporary that I really, really loved, and I don't think a ton of people have read it because I'm a big YA contemporary fan. That is no secret at all. So anytime I can find a new one that I love, I just want to shout it from the mountaintops. So if you love YA contemporaries and just want to read them all, I would highly recommend this one. It's adorable and cute and all of the many things. Now, moving on to my 5 adult underrated books. The first one I want to talk about, it's probably the least underrated, and I feel kind of cheating by putting it on here because this book is really big, like on Amazon and on Goodreads and on the internet in general, but I feel like I haven't heard a ton of people talk about it on Booktube. In fact, I learned about this book, I think, just on the internet in general, not even near Booktube. And that is Eleanor, Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I adored this book. It's one of my favorite books of the year, honestly. It's a very, heartwarming and growth type of story. We follow Eleanor, who doesn't have the best social skills, and it's all about her kind of blossoming, if you will. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, quiet type of book that I just devour. And like I said, this book is really big on everywhere but Booktube, and that may be just me that says that. I mean, how many times have I said that now? Probably a lot. But either way, if you just love heartwarming stories about somebody growing and just embracing who they are, I would highly recommend Eleanor Oliphant. Such a beautiful book, and yeah, not a lot of people have read it here on Booktube. If you're interested in adult books, read this one. Another one you guys have heard me talk about quite a lot on this channel for this past year is Young Being Young by Gabrielle Zevin. Gabrielle Zevin, I think, is an underrated author in particular because I don't hear a lot of people talk about her, and she should be talked about. I love, love, love her books. This book I read, again, on a whim. That's a lot of times you find your most favorite and underrated reads by just picking something random off your shelf, and I highly recommend you do that because that has really benefited me this year. I found a lot of my favorite books ever by doing just that. So, main character named Olivia, who is a congressional intern, and she has an affair with the congressman, who is a married man. And obviously the affair comes to light and she gets thrown under the bus, quite literally, and so she decides to move to Maine to change her name and to start over fresh, and she also has a daughter. And this book is told in like different formats. By that I mean it's told from like 5 different characters. There's one from her mom, there's one about Olivia herself, there's one from her daughter, there's one from the congressman's wife. So it's just it sounds like a very heavy book when you talk about an affair and, you know, politics and things like that. But Gabrielle Zevin has this great way of just lighthearted and fresh and funny, and I really enjoyed this one. Like, nobody talks about this book, and it's so amazing. Like, it's just so refreshing of a type of book, which I love. So definite read. I loved every second of it. Next book I want to talk about is by an author that is definitely not underrated at all, like not underhyped by any means, but I think this book of hers is, and that is What Alice Forgot by Liane Moriarty. So when you think of Liane Moriarty, you think immediately of Big Little Lies, because it was made into an HBO special. No big deal, right? But nobody talks about What Alice Forgot. She has written a ton of other books, and I have read the majority of her books, and I really loved What Alice Forgot. It's her most lighthearted one, in my opinion. Funny, and nobody talks about this one. Whenever you hear of Liane Moriarty, you hear Big Little Lies or you hear The Husband's Secret. You don't hear a ton about this book. This book follows our main character, Alice, who has a tumble in the gym, and she has amnesia, and she pretty much forgets the last 5 years of her life. And what she remembers is she had a great marriage with this guy, and they had kids, and now it's 5 years later and they're getting a divorce and things are rocky, and she does not remember how it got to that point at all. So it's her trying to, you know, figure out her memory again and try to, you know, rekindle her relationship with her husband and things like that. Again, Liane Moriarty is not underrated as an author, but this book in particular by her is. Not a lot of people talk about it, and they should. It was so amazing. It's definitely more funny and charismatic and charming than it is Big Little Lies. It deals a lot more, you know, bigger topics, but I still really enjoyed this one. I feel like a lot of these books I've talked about a lot because I love them, and I don't think they get enough love, but you're just gonna hear them again in this video. And the next one I'm talking about is Close Enough to Touch by Colleen Oakley. This is kind of a chick lit novel all about a girl that is allergic to the human touch, and she has to get a job, and she gets a job in the library, and she meets a guy, and it's adorable. Another quiet, you know, heartwarming type of book, which I love to death. I also always show the end page of this book because they're bicycles, so adorable. But again, another really adorable book that nobody ever talks about. I don't think I've seen a single person talk about this book on Booktube. So it's an amazing book. I loved it. It was just so adorable. The book I'm going to talk about is another one by an author that is definitely not underrated or underhyped by any means, but I feel like I don't hear a ton about her books on Booktube. And again, you guessed it, that may be just me, and that is Small Great Things by Jodi Picoult. I read Jodi Picoult at the ripe age of 14, which is probably way too young because she writes some heavy stuff. But this book came out, I want to say, last year, maybe, I think. And I read it, I listened to an audiobook, I thought it was phenomenal. Heard a ton about it on Booktube, which is a shame because it's a beautiful book. She's got so many books under her belt, it's ridiculous. But we follow our main character Ruth, who is an African-American labor and delivery nurse, and she and one of her patients are white supremacists, and he comes into play, and the white supremacists don't want her to touch the baby, and the baby dies, unfortunately, and it all happens to be in a courtroom battle, which is kind of what Jodi Picoult is known for, like this kind of mysterious courtroom battle and things like that. I love this book. It's a hard book to read, do not get me wrong, because it talks about diversity, it talks about racism and things that should be talked about for sure, but the way she wrote it was very beautiful. And there you have it. Those are 10 books that I think that you should read that I don't hear a ton about on Booktube. Again, you could probably link like 50 different channels that have talked about this book, but there's a lot of Booktube channels, okay? I try to watch a fair few, and these are books I don't think get enough love. So you may agree with me, you may disagree. Either way, I hope you check out these books because I love them all. And if you're going to read any of these books because of this video, please let me know. And if you know of any underrated books in particular that you want to talk about that don't get enough love, please leave them down below. I would love to hear your thoughts and suggestions. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye.